Are you struggling to balance your modern life and your faith? You're in the right place. Welcome to the Legacy Dads Podcast with Lance and Dante, offering biblical-based wisdom and that weekly dose of what truly works in men's lives. The Legacy Dads Podcast, real men, authentic faith. Here are your hosts of the Legacy Dads Podcast. They're authentic, transparent, and not always politically correct. Lance and Dante.
Hey everyone, Dante and my partner Lance from Legacy Dads. I hope you guys are all doing well. Legacy Dads is your weekly dose of biblical manhood. This podcast is for men, husbands, and fathers in all stages of life, where we promote and advocate proven biblical principles for leaving a lasting legacy. I don't know about you, Lance, but for me it feels like we're in week 51 of shelter and quarantine.
No. I think you mean you feel like you turned 51 because somebody had a birthday this last weekend. That's what I think.
52.
Okay. 52. I was trying to give you the benefit of the doubt there, but
yeah, I'm having a hard time. It's actually funny. After 35, it didn't get as painful. 50 was a little bit of a hard mark. Like whoa, like now I'm on the spiraling downturn of my life, on the other half of headed to 100. So yeah, that aspect of it, that's got a little bit of, oh boy, what do we do? But everything else here, we're holding on here. We're doing stuff like that. So
that's good.
Not too bad though. But how about you? What's been going on? You're refinishing some things around the house, or what?
Yeah, I've been, I'm doing like honey-do lists, man. So it's funny, I said this before, but if you're bored during this thing, you obviously have nothing. I mean, if you're just sitting around binge watching Netflix,
you got problems.
You got problems, man. I mean, I've had, and part of it was I was in Africa forever, so I had this honey-do list, and I had this list of stuff that I wanted to get done, and so I've just been, every single day projects, just knocking out projects every day, doing stuff like that. So it's been really good. It's been good for me.
Good.
So let's talk about this, though. I mean, I know it hasn't been good for some people. Some people are. People are like,
that
all
would
right.
be an understatement. If you had issues already going into the shelter or quarantine, or maybe some relationship strife or some outstanding issues that you haven't dealt with your teenagers or your adolescents, you definitely have highlighted those in every aspect of the word. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it the same thing with we've talked about with marriage is that. If there were some rocky areas before we went into this quarantine, I guarantee those things that's popping up during this quarantine. So I think, what we need to do, Dante, is kind of let's talk a little bit about today. If you're feeling the marriage right now is feeling the effects of this quarantine and you're ready to go out and protest and tell people you want to be liberated. Let's talk about some ways, like what could we do for our marriage, to keep our marriage, rekindle that fire, keep it sane, keep mama happy. Let's talk about some ways we can do that. Does that sound good to you?
we have some saying in Men of Faith, Legacy Dads. I think we've adopted some of those as well. But if mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy in the house. And, happy wife, happy life. And, guys, you're listening to this, don't tune out on that. All in all, we're all about leaving a legacy, leaving a spiritual legacy and all that. But, also applying this to scripture and how we should treat our spouses is definitely where we're going with this. And, ways to rekindle. I mean, guys, if we've been, pedal to the metal, you've been working extra hours, you've been, trying to get, school paid for, college saved up for, retirement, you're doing everything else like that. And you've been busting a hump trying to get things done. This podcast is for you. I mean, it's funny. I think I was reading a wrestler, I think it was Hulk Hogan had this post, Julie Roy's talked about it, but basically saying, you take away all of our idols. The Lord is put that away. And so we don't have sports. We don't have, venues by which we can all go together. We can go to the bar. We can go to that sports team. We can go to this hobby. We can do that. And lo and behold, here we are, these idols stripped away. And now, in theory, it's just our families. If you're married, you have the privilege to be married. It's you and your spouse. With your kids, it's you, your spouse, and kids. And all that being said is, what's our excuse if we're confined to be under one roof and to repair the leaks that have been happening in our lives over the last several months, maybe the last year, maybe the last 5 years, maybe the last 10 years? Guys, if we're having a heart to heart here, no holds barred. If you got some, ideas and shortfalls in your marriage right now, and you know exactly what they are, whether it be intimacy, whether it be finances, whether whatever it is, now is the time, to batten down the hatches, really be honest with this podcast, apply it to what you're reading in scripture, and get your vertical right with God, and just sit there and say, give me some ways, Lord, to rekindle this marriage that I need, to put in perspective of what's important. With that, Lance, one of the things that I think are really important, if we're going to be serious about having biblical application and putting this thing in the perspective that God wants us to do it, is consider your spouse's heart. It's Philippians 2:3, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value your wife, your husband, above yourself. You will show them that you truly, put God's word in your life, that you're showing biblical or spiritual maturity, and you're willing to humble yourself for your partner. You're willing to humble yourself for the person you love. Does that make sense to you, Lance?
Yeah, and I think what really goes along with that is I think we have to watch our mouths and what we say. And I would say, like, number two is, and I've this has definitely been me, is we have to be very cautious about snapping or criticizing or judging or just saying the first thing that comes to our mind. Because I think when we're all cooped up, and especially if you're watching the news and all the panic and fear, and it's easy to get a little bit frustrated. We don't have, like you said, Dante, we don't have the space we normally do. We don't have the time off we normally do, or the time away. You know what I'm saying? Just and it's easy, I think, to just respond in a harsh tone. Or I know I've had some times where I'm irritable. And so I have to really think about that. I have to think about, kindness and patience. And I just look at it as, I've got to remember that maybe the first thing on my mind, I don't want to say that. I want to think through, okay, is this, what I'm going to say, is that going to be hurtful? Is that going to, am I going to come off as criticizing or judging or condescending or whatever? And I look at scripture says in Luke 3 or Luke 6:31, as you wish that others would do to you, do to them. So, again, going back to that, all right, just stop and think, before I say something stupid, let something stupid come out of my mouth. I got to think about this a little bit first. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think, if you look at that, the next thing to do would be, put your spouse's needs first. I mean, let's be honest, if you're fortunate like me, you can work from home, you're here for a set of time, but I'm not putting the commute time back and forth to the city, on my radar. So I've got an extra 2 hours to engage, 2 hours to get, stuff done really quick before the next work day or whatever. But, you come up and, kids, they have e-learning from school, they're not really able to participate. I'm working in the basement, so I can see like a herd of elephants, come down around breakfast time, come down around lunchtime. And then, you got the wife that's sitting there, not only trying to manage the house, work her business from her house, but then, expected to do the things that she's, willingly doing. And, little things like, guys, I heard once, foreplay starts in the kitchen. Foreplay starts when you do some chores that normally would be your wife or your kids, and your wife's overwhelmed because it's not going to get done before the next day. Well, if you're really trying to get to that mojo, that magic, that really works in the bedroom, and per se, is start where it really counts. And, your wife comes down from maybe helping, somebody get online for a test or printing out a document, and she walks back into the kitchen and it's flipping immaculate before she begins dinner. you're starting to get things moving again. The tension that might have been, you're not contributing, or maybe she's not contributing. And if you're hearing this and you've been an obstacle for your husband, just fighting him, not doing the things that you want him to do, but instead of helping the things with him that are important to him, these are some key things to start rekindling, that you're putting, the spouse before yourself. And that's what I'm just saying is, when you put your spouse's needs first, Titus, I think 2:4 talks about loving your husbands and your children, what the role is of an elder. But in the same token, wives too, it says, to love your husbands and to, honor them. And, things that are important to that is like, when you all of a sudden die to yourself and you put your family first, you put your spouse first, all of a sudden, I think you start speaking languages, and whatever those love languages are for those kids, for those wife, that really says, you know what? Something's different here, and maybe, just maybe, there's a serious heart condition change going on here. And you don't need to say, look at me, you don't need to sit there and say, look, I'm on top of the tower, you see me doing these things. Like Lance says, we don't need to make the comments are what got us into trouble from the first place.
Yep.
Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, reading James.
Yep, absolutely. And I'd add that too. I think the next thing I look at is again, we're in these confined, environments, and I think it's easy to, I know I did this just today, taking things they're minor little things and making a major big deal out of them. And I think we just need to remember that, is that, we're going to be, in this confined environment, we're going to take things and blow them out of proportion. So we have to remember that marriage is messy. We're two sinners under one roof. I don't know, Romans 3:23, I don't think it says, for your wife has sinned and falls short of the glory of God. I believe it says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. That means all of us, and us included. And so we just have to, remember that and keep that in perspective. The other thing I would say on this too is that while you don't want to, I would say in the problem area, don't take things and, that are minor and make a big deal out of them. But I don't know if you guys have been doing this, Dante. I know a lot of people have, and I think we're going to see coming out of this some positive. I think there's people who've been reevaluating their priorities and really looking at, I would really hope, and I've seen some of this, and I would really hope there's going to be more of this. I know there's been families that are they're having meals together again. They're doing prayer time together again. They're doing a lot of things as a family that a lot of people were just running fast. And now this whole thing has slowed them down and made them really examine. And I think, some people have put in some really healthy practices. I would hope that coming out of the backside of this thing, we would continue to do those things. And I think, but also, talking about just reevaluating our priorities, what's really important in life? What are some things that, we spent a lot of time and money and effort on before this thing, that now when it really comes down to it, those things don't really matter a whole lot. And so I know a lot of, me and Jen and our family, we've been looking at, have we been putting a lot of time and treasure and talent into places that, that's not really a priority in our lives anymore, and we just need to let those things go. So I don't know if you guys been doing any of that at all, Dante?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, technology and like you say, streaming and just different things of like, the stresses of life and everything else of like, it seems, the older you get, the more you climb in career, the busier the task can. And sometimes I found myself just disengaging and just really getting into a video stream or streaming stuff. And it's just like, what? How hard is it to, one of the things I've been doing, Lance, and it's just been awesome for Kate and I, is after we get done with a trade day, I call it my geriatric walk now that I'm 52 and my colleagues have been laughing at me, but literally, we grab, maybe a kid or we grab, each other and we go, 2-4 mile walk and we just talk, and it's just like little stuff at first. And then all of a sudden, like today we're just walking and it's not that my wife was upset or complaining or anything like that. It's just that she needed somebody to hear that, one, she wasn't off, kilter, that too, she legitimately had, concerns about some topics that we were talking about. And, she just said, as we were walking at the end of the day today, it's just really nice to be heard and to be understood. And, to me, I don't know about you, Lance, but when you hear your wife really connecting, and your heart's connecting to her heart, because what she's saying now all of a sudden isn't, while you're texting on your phone or while you're doing other stuff for the kids or you're doing that, but it's just literally you and her, nobody else there interrupting. And it's just you and the path that you're on, whether you're hiking, whether you're in the woods, whether you're in the desert. In our case, you're on a bike path, but it just, for me, it was just really special in the sense that it just made those things extra special. The fact that, I felt like we were putting her there and that she was most important at that point, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That's totally awesome.
The next thing is, let's just say you listener, husband, wife, grandma, grandpa, you have a guest, maybe a distant relative, somebody that you haven't seen and you love them. I mean, you would introduce them to everybody. You can't wait for them to be there. They couldn't stay long enough. They couldn't stay short enough. You want them there. How would you treat a guest that you love and enjoy and make them feel welcome in your house? 1 Peter 4:8-9 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers over a multitude of sins. So you got that, you got that person in mind, you got that couple in mind that's coming to stay with you. Maybe, guys, it's, one of your best men or one of your groomsmen from your wedding that you love hanging out. They're from a different state. You haven't seen them in a couple of years. Maybe your best bud growing up, maybe a cousin or somebody like that you just love their marriage. You love their friendship, and they're there. And don't tell me that you wouldn't pull out the nice bottle of wine. You wouldn't take them, well, not in this context of shelter and quarantine, but if the restaurant was open, you wouldn't take them to your favorite restaurant. You would pull out all stops to make them feel that extra special in your house.
Yeah.
Yet, why do we find ourselves being so short, so, impatient, not tempered, and just dismissive to the very people that we should be loving the most? And to me, this is a heart check question, not only for you, Lance, not only for me, but for our listeners, is, this one, can kind of hit me right square between the eyes when I find myself getting impatient with, my little ones. Mm-hmm. And they're not so little now. I've got 3 teenagers in the house. The baby turned 13 on Friday. So now all of a sudden I've got 2 young women and a young man that I'm shepherding. I've got a foreign exchange student. And if I'm short, I'm cross, I'm not patient, I'm not making them feel welcome. I mean, what have I been called to do? And my number one mission field is my wife and my kids. And if I can't get that straight, and I can't make them feel like they're the guest of honor in this house, or they're a part of the kingdom of this household that we have, that their young princess is a prince and my wife a queen, I've got to go back to the Bible and get my priorities straight. Don't you think, Lance?
Yeah, I think, and that'll lead into the next thing I'm going to talk about too, is just remembering, it kind of goes back to what I said earlier, remembering that we're all sinners, we're all going to fall short, and we have to remember, we have to give each other permission to fail and just realize that we're going to fall short. And, I think that goes back to, what we talk about a lot with grace-based parenting and having a grace-filled marriage, and realizing that, I think sometimes we say, oh man, I love God's grace, and God just, I screw up over and over again. I sin all the time and God gives me that grace. Well, are we doing that with our spouse? Are we doing that with our kids? We really need to look at that and just say, if people are falling short, if people are irritating us, people are failing, we have to show them that grace. And I don't know what this is, Dante, but, my wife deals with this a lot too, just, couples and parents just have a hard time. They love talking about God's grace and reading about God's grace and getting God's grace, but then turning around and giving that same grace to a spouse or kids is so hard for people. So I just think, we need to think about that, we need to think about, look at it from, if from God's perspective, if God judged me the way I'm judging my spouse, or if God judged me the way I'm judging my children. It's like, come on, can you live under that yoke? I couldn't.
What chance will we have?
Exactly. So that just is the big thing, is just remember, give each other permission to fail, show that grace to one another, and realize that, people aren't trying to do that. And I think we have to bring that grace into our home and just let it fill not only our marriage, but also, our family and our kids.
And I think that goes really nice into our next point, Lance. But, what I hear from that too is, convicting, especially when things aren't going according to your expectations or your rules or your desires, is, simply just don't tear each other down. And our next point is build each other up. I look at Ephesians 4:29 that says, "Let everything you say be good and helpful, so that your words will be encouragement to those who hear them." And I think about 1 Thessalonians, when Paul's talking, we treated you, Thessalonica, the church, like spiritual fathers. We comforted, we encourage, and we urge you guys to live a life worthy of Jesus Christ. And that being said, if you're trying to comfort, encourage, and urge your wife to live a life worthy of Jesus Christ, and you're supposed to be the spiritual leader of your house and be modeling Christ, is that how you want to model Christ to your kids? Whether they're adolescent, whether they're teenagers, whether they're adults home from college or getting ready to go back to college, is that how you want to model Christ? And your spouse, if you're fortunate enough to be married, is that how you want her to see Christ, based on how you're treating her, how you're reacting, how you're overreacting, underreacting? The other thing too is, the other side of that coin makes me think about this now is, when you just completely just turn yourself off, like you check out. And that's not building each other up either. That's not honoring the vows that you made. So I would say, when you're looking to do that, if you play sports, you play baseball, you got your teammates cheering for you, you hit, a triple, you're going around the horn and you see the coach, yelling to go for that extra base home, because there was a flub of a ball or something like that, and you're rounding third, you got everybody in the dugout, everybody on the bench, you got coaches, their faces are smiling, they're screaming, they're like, run, go, go, go. And you're sitting there and, you're encouraged like that. You're feeling lifted up by your team. You pick the sport, you pick the event, and you got that. I mean, when you have that confidence behind you and others building you up, you feel like that point you're invincible. Imagine if you turn that feeling to your family, to your wife and your kids, and instead of tearing down, instead of, checking out, you got in the game, you fully engage, and you sit there and said, not only am I going to engage, to a woman, if you want to sit there and say, my marriage, my bedroom has been dead for a year, 5 years, 7 years, I'm sorry, guys, I'm a little bit more tough in men's ministry and elder of my church on men than I ever am on women. And women have their own issues. I mean, there's a sinner in a woman in the household. There's a sinner in a man in the household, two sinners. But, you got to take the bull by the horn. And if you're the one that has got that bedroom cold, because of inaction or action,
you need to turn that into the Super Bowl. Turn that bedroom into Super Bowl.
You need to turn that bedroom in the Super Bowl. But the only way you're going to get across that goal line, buddy, is not by sitting there saying that I want it now like a caveman. You got to build your wife up, and you got to do it without having a hidden agenda, because she'll see right through that. You got to do it from the joy of the heart. And that goes to another thing, true, is what fruit is your life bearing? And that being said, is there more of God's word and his authority in your life, or is this all about your kingdom?
Yeah.
And so go ahead, Lance.
No, I was just going to say, you can go back and listen. We did a podcast on sex and intimacy for parents.
I was just thinking of that. Yeah.
For parents, you guys can go back and check that out. And we really get into the intimacy piece for parents on that one. And the next thing I was going to hit up here, Dante, is remembering, and this is I think it's easy for us to sometimes, again, when we're in close proximity or you've been married a long time, it's easy. I know I do this. My wife does this to me. We're both guilty of this, of sometimes the stress of life, we take it out on each other, versus remembering who the real enemy is. We need to remember, go read, if you haven't read C.S. Lewis's Screw Tape Letters, It talks about Satan is going to use the doubt and the noise of the world to cloud our minds and to get us thinking that other people are not the enemy, or other people are the enemy, and we just need to remember that. We remember the devil prowls around like a lion looking to devour our families. So we have to do that, and I won't go back into. I love Matt Chandler's speech he gave on letting a little lion into your house and thinking that the lion's not going to attack and kill your family. You gotta put that lion to death and not let that thing in. But just remember that. Remember, your spouse is not the enemy. Your kids are not the enemy. And if there's anything that is driving a wedge between you and your spouse, between you and your family, that is not it. You have to remember who that enemy is and put that thing to death. Does that make sense to you, Dante?
Yeah, and in line with that, we were told in the Gospel of John as well, the enemy has come to steal and kill and destroy. And Satan knows what a powerful tool sexuality can be to bind a couple together. So he's intent on using that power to destroy intimacy, true intimacy. What are ways that steal that intimacy? Lust, pornography, pride, anger, impatience, all of these things that are what the enemy just fuels in your life, whether it's that, the iPhone, that quote unquote smartphone, an image, a glance, a scent, a movie, things that just draw you away from the intimacy of your relationship, and you let other things steal your intimacy. And that's what the devil wants to do. He doesn't have any new weapons of destruction, any weapons of warfare. He's using the same weapons he's used since the beginning of Scripture began, that we started reading. And the only thing that he's doing differently is he's repackaging how he does it, and the way and the technology are some of these gates that he can use to intertwine his weaponry. But the idea is, we have the person in our life, Jesus Christ, that has overcome. He's bound the strong man. He is pillaging his house and taking those who he loves with him to be sons and daughters. And that's my thing, is put this in perspective, Lance, exactly like you said. Who is the real enemy in your relationship?
Okay, what do we got next here, Dante?
You made an oath. You made a vow before God, support each other and have each other's back. 1 Corinthians says, love is patient and kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with truth. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. And we read in Ephesians 5, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, he having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor, without spot or wrinkle or any such thing, that she might be holy and without blemish. In the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his wife and his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that this refers to Christ and the church. However, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. And you guys, when you sit there and you're newlyweds, you're engaged to this bride, you're engaged to this husband, we can give a laundry list of the reasons of every little thing and nuance of why you love this person, why this person's perfect for you, and everything else like that. And we can sit there and as we get into years of maybe some financial, maybe some health, maybe some kids, we're wrestling through different things, moving, new job, new career, loss of a job, everything else, all these stresses, and we all of a sudden, Lance or I read, 1 Corinthians 13, Ephesians 5, all of you can recite that. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. And you can recite the verses better than probably Lance and I can. And the problem with that is that's just it. You're just checking the box. You're reading it, but you're not doing what the words say. And, James, we read about that, consider it pure joy, my brothers, my sisters, when you face trial and tribulation. And the idea is what's the purpose of that? And, those that are looking for wisdom, going the right path, and you don't have it, ask God for it. And the thing about that is, as we sit there and put this in perspective of what are we saying here in this oath that we've made for each other, go through Ecclesiastes and tell me how important vows are to God. You made a vow for your spouse that you would love, honor, cherish her till death do you part, in sickness and in health. And God does not take that vow lightly. And if you're serious about a biblical Christian marriage, one man, one woman, and the covenant of marriage, then you're serious the fact that you're dying to self and you're putting her before anything else that you do. And all that being said is, now what? What are you going to do next? And what's your step in doing that? And that's my point in all of this is, don't take your vow lightly. And if you've been mishandling it, you've been misrepresenting it, get on your knees and ask God for forgiveness. Get yourself right, and then turn back to this oath that you made, God.
Yeah, and I think that brings up to right into the last thing I would talk about too, is this, that you do not quit. And like you said, Dante, you made that vow before God. I've heard people say sometimes, well, marriage is 50-50. And I'm like, no, marriage is 100-100. And sometimes it's 170. And there's going to be times where your spouse, maybe they're in a season, maybe there's health issues, maybe there's whatever issues, and your spouse is only given 60%. Well, that still means you're giving 100%. You don't give up. You don't conditionally love your wife. Well, my wife's not meeting my needs, so I'm going to hold back and not do the things that I would normally do for her because she's not meeting my needs. That's crap. And that is not a, I'm sorry, that's not a biblical definition of marriage. You are in this thing 100%. And don't forget that. And don't forget that, that you're not going to quit on this marriage. And I think that's what one of the things, Dante, when it says, that the two become one flesh, that means, before you were married, it was me, me, me. You could say, it was all about me and me this and me that. After you're married, it's about we, us, us, us. And you need to get that out of it. It's not about your needs and I feel this way and well, I work and no, it's about the family, the unit, the one flesh of you and your spouse. You have to start taking ownership for that and realizing that if there's a flaw, if there's a crack, if there's something in the marriage that is not working, take some ownership for that, because it's not just about you, it's about both of you together. It's about the two of you. And I look at that as my wife and I said, we are a team and Christ is at the center of our team, and nobody and nothing is going to come in between our team. And it's never going to be about just Lance or never going to be about Jenny. It's always going to be about Lance and Jenny as a team. And that's just the perspective, and we don't ever quit. And we realize that no matter how hard it gets, no matter how bad it gets, we're not going to give up on each other. I will not give up on my spouse, no matter what. And that's just and you can go back and listen to my testimony when my wife and I were on the verge of divorce and everybody was saying file the divorce paperwork. I just told my wife and I said, I am not going to give up on us. I'm not giving up on this marriage. And my wife didn't give up on me, and we were able to turn this thing around. So the final thing I would say is just do not quit. Don't quit on your marriage. Do not quit on intimacy. Don't quit on romance. Don't quit on rekindling your marriage, no matter where you're at. And like Dante said, no matter how many years, maybe areas have been, not to where they need to be. Well, now's a good time to start getting those things back up and doing your part to do that. And so just don't give up and don't quit on that. So Dante, I'll turn it over to you. We got some final comments. What do you think on this, brother?
Yeah, Lance, I love the fact that you went back to your testimony, and you guys can go back to our podcast early on when Lance really shared that. I mean, guys, you can sit there and say, you don't understand my situation. You don't get it. And like in Lance's testimony, guys, this is somebody that is not only, telling you it like it is, but he's somebody that lived through it. I mean, he came home, empty house, Jen gone with the kids, back home. And, he's sitting there and having to rethink everything where he was at. And, when he showed a little bit of impatience of what our role is and how we should be doing it, it's because he was smack dab right in the middle of, okay, I got two choices right now. I can quit and run and live like I've been living. And I don't think he'd be the man that you're talking to right now and hearing on this podcast, or I'm talking to, and that is my dear friend. But you're talking to somebody that humbled himself, put God's word in his life and pursued his wife, because the very thing that God gave him on this earth, he wanted to be a good steward of, and he wanted to be able to look God in the eyes and just say, Lord, this is your daughter. And, I may have not gotten everything perfect, but I'm giving an account for it. And I'm going to make sure that you see that I love my wife, and I'm going to finish that well. And Lance, I thank you. Part of the whole reason that you and I became partners in the way we did is because is for real as you are. And one of the things, if you were reading, our blog way back when, before we started podcasting, Lance and I, we got our wives, we got our kids that not only listen to this and read about us, but hear us, and they're not afraid to call a spade a spade. So if we're not living it, we're getting called out on it, from our men's groups, from, the people that we walk with in accountability. And so, what you're seeing here is two sinners that don't have it right all the time. And we make a lot of mistakes. Believe me, we do. But there's a genuine humility in Lance, and I hope that you hear it through many of his podcasts. And this man is not only practicing what he preaches, but he's totally living it in the sense that even when he blows it, and no matter whether he feels he was totally right or wrong, he's going to go back and he's going to take the leadership and make a wrong, even if it's not on him, right. And the purpose of that is putting the things in perspective, that it's him and Jen, and it's not Lance and then Jen. It's not Jen and then Lance. It's him and Jen. They are one flesh. And the craziness, guys, if you're just saying, but you don't understand, you don't get it, you haven't put up with this, you don't know what she's like. And the reality of it is, no, I don't. But let's be honest. Let's look at some of the things that we've done on our part to get her to be that way. And if we're really, really honest, let's leave her alone to the Lord, and let's put ourselves in, okay, Lord, let's talk about my part, my ownership, my cause and effect of why my spouse is this way with me, or closed off with me, or lack of intimate with me. You fill in your gap right now, and you get honest with the Lord and really say it. And all that being said is, don't quit. You made an oath. Don't give up. You made a vow before God. And this is what we take really important. And I think that if you can make the things that we say here today, and maybe add to them some of the things that God is revealing in your life, this whole aspect of finishing well, you want to be a legacy dad, you want to be a legacy husband, then it's really starting to put the things in perspective of doing a checklist, not on your wife's faults, not on your husband's faults, but right where you're at. And what do I need to own, Lord? And you take care of the other spouse for me, because I can't do it my way, because my way has gotten me further away from my spouse.
Yeah, and I would say, Dante, and I appreciate the edification there, but I'll tell you guys that until I got my vertical relationship with God right, none of my horizontal stuff worked out. So the first step in that is always getting your relationship with God right. And it was only by the grace of God that God allowed me and guided me to rekindle with my wife. So that's, I would tell you guys that is get that vertical relationship right in the beginning, and then the horizontal relationship will get there. So with that, guys, I want to say, as always, we thank you guys so much for your support. You can go over and leave us a great 5-star review on iTunes, Spotify, and Pandora. Hit us up on Instagram and the closed Facebook group. And I think we might be doing a live get together this week. Check on the closed Facebook group. I don't know if we're going to do that or not, but we might be doing that. So go over there, check that out. If there's on there, we'd love to talk to you guys and hear what you guys have to say. See how everybody's doing with this quarantine. We need to take care of each other. But with that, guys, we want to say, as always, we love you guys. We thank you guys so much for your support. We're praying for you guys. Take care. God bless. We will see you next time.
Awesome.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of the Legacy Dads Podcast with Lance and Dante. Real men, authentic faith. For more great content and to stay up to date, visit legacydads.org and on Facebook.com/LegacyDads and on Twitter @Legacy_Dad. If you enjoyed today's episode, please review and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time on the Legacy Dads Podcast. Real men, authentic faith.